Kyle Erickson here. Let's say you're out shopping for a new Mac and you have a limited budget, or maybe you're just transitioning from Windows and you're just looking to test drive Mac OS out. If you head over to the Apple Store and check out the latest and the greatest in the Mac lineup, and you listen to a lot of the hype out there, you're probably going to come across the new MacBook Pros. Both the 14-inch and 16-inch Pro models do sound pretty amazing with the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, but they do come at a pretty hefty price tag starting at $2,000. Where if you look a little bit further down the list, you can grab an M1 Air for $1,000 or a desktop Mac Mini for $700. The new Pro models are amazing machines, but there are a lot of us out there who just can't afford to spend that much. And even if you can, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to hop on the bandwagon and pick one of these up. If you've been watching this channel for the past year or so, you'll know that I've been using both the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 Mac Mini for a while now, and I think that I can provide some pretty good insight on these machines. I've got a little bit of a unique perspective because I'm using these machines in a variety of ways, be it for technical stuff like software development and more creative work like making these videos, doing some graphic design, editing photos, and so on. It's really interesting to me to see how much people's opinions have already shifted on the regular M1. A few months ago, the regular M1 was the most powerful Mac that was out there, and I know a lot of creatives and technical people out there who love these. And now that we have the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, the regular M1 is seen as more of an entry-level option. But really, when you compare it to competing products outside Apple, and even to previous Apple models, it's still a premium machine. And I think that's kind of gotten lost with the new chip releases this fall. If you're just looking for something to browse the web, use Office software, making spreadsheets or word processing or watching videos, or just to use casually, a regular M1 is going to be more than powerful enough to do everything that you want. It's really performant. The M1 Air is also fanless, so it's dead silent. The build quality of the machines is awesome, like most Apple products. The keyboard and the display are great. There's really not a lot to complain about. Same with the Mac Mini. Obviously, it's not an all-in-one solution like a MacBook, but comparing it to other desktop computers, especially at that price, it's still really impressive. But what if you start ramping up the requirements? If you start to get into resource-heavy work, the dynamic does change a little bit. If you're doing software development specifically, which is what I originally got my M1 Air for, the jump in performance is very noticeable if you're coming from a non-M1 machine. Previous to my M1 Air, I was using an old Intel MacBook Pro and an Intel MacBook Air that was released just before the M1 was announced, and the performance gains were instantly noticeable. If I was building an app in Xcode, the build and compile times were way faster. I will say when I first got the M1, there was some issues surrounding compatibility when I was developing software with SDKs or libraries, but Apple Silicon support is very solid now. It's very rare that you're going to find anything that doesn't work with M1. When I used to build apps on my old Intel MacBooks, the fans would just start spinning like crazy, and it would get really bogged down running external monitors and doing build processes. The M1 Air has been completely the opposite. It's been super performant. As I said earlier, it is fanless, so it doesn't make any noise. I was a touch worried because it was fanless that it wouldn't dissipate heat well enough, which was a problem that a lot of Intel machines had, where things would just get too hot and it would really affect performance. This totally isn't the case. I don't think I've ever really felt this machine get hot building mobile apps or web apps or having external monitors plugged in and so on. The same goes for the M1 Mac Mini. Between the Air and the Mini, the machines that I have are very similar. Both have M1 CPUs. They both have 16 gigs of RAM, so there isn't a whole lot of difference between the two when you're talking about performance. I use the Mac Mini mostly for all my creative work, predominantly making these videos, editing photos, maybe some design work here and there, things like that. And all that's been done through a 4K monitor. When I got the Mini, it was after using the M1 Air for a few months or so. I still had a desktop PC that I'd built 4 or 5 months before that, and I'd bought a new camera and started shooting a lot more 4K video with higher bit rates, and my system was actually really struggling a lot to handle that. Just as a test, I thought that I'd try out my MacBook Air with Final Cut Pro for a video or two and see what that experience was like, and I was blown away at how much smoother everything was. I didn't have any issues with H.265 codecs or footage, there were no crashes, render times were super fast, and all the things that you want to see. And that kind of made it a no-brainer for me, because I just built the PC that I was using just a few months before. I was able to sell that machine and buy a Mac Mini with Final Cut Pro with the money that I got from it. Now it's been roughly 8 or 9 months that I've been using this machine, and I've had 0 issues with it. It's worked really well for me. I really don't have any complaints at all. My video editing experience has been really good. I will say that the only time it does show some slowness is if I have maybe Lightroom and Final Cut Pro open, to say if I'm rendering out a video for the channel and I'm also working on the thumbnail at the same time, or occasionally I have a project that has a lot of stacked clips with effects. Anytime you start throwing effects to 4K footage, things do seem to get choppy here and there, but nothing that I would say impedes me from getting anything done or that annoys me or hinders my workflow. I think that the new M1 Pro and M1 Max chips will help out a lot when you see these areas of slowness, and just to help things get done a little bit quicker. You're gonna get faster render times for sure, and if you're editing a bunch of videos stacked with a bunch of effects, high resolutions, high bit rates, doing 3D work, for sure anything that's GPU intensive, I think that there is definitely a benefit to having one of these machines. And the same goes on the software side. If you're doing any machine learning or AI training or that kind of thing where you're using a ton of processing power, then it probably does make sense to pick one of these up. The new models also have amazing displays, provided that you're okay with a notch. If you are a designer, maybe you want a laptop but you need a bigger display. I know that the MacBook Air comes in at 13 inches, so there really isn't a whole lot of screen real estate there. Jumping up to 16 inches makes quite a difference. The same goes if you need more space for software UI that you use. I know using Final Cut Pro on a 13-inch display isn't exactly the greatest experience. If you're going to be plugging into a monitor anyway, then maybe that doesn't concern you as much. Another reason you might want to grab the new MacBook Pro is just the overall design. Maybe like having the different ports set up. I know having an SD card reader would be something that would be really nice to have for me personally. Or maybe you just really like the MagSafe charger, or you just like the way that the new machine feels or looks or whatever it is. In any case, I think that those things are probably a lot less important because they're not going to make much difference in how you use the machine or how you're working on it. I'm using these machines daily, and I would say that I'm doing some pretty resource heavy tasks, probably more than the average person. I've been really happy with both the M1 Air and the M1 Mini for everything that I've done. If you are someone who does ramp up the system use quite a bit, the new M1 Pro and M1 Max are great options provided you're okay with the extra cost. But don't let anyone trick you into thinking that you need these machines. I think what I would say is if you know exactly what you want out of your machine, you know your pain points, and you know where you need performance or features where the regular M1 just won't cut it, then yeah, it totally makes sense to grab one of the new MacBook Pros. But if you're a little unsure, you don't want to spend a ton of money, and you don't need a computer that pushes the system very much, the M1 is a pretty safe bet. I've had no issues with mine. I've been able to handle everything that I've thrown at it. Could it be faster? Sure, things can always be faster, but it's a lot more performant than any machine that I used previous to it, and it gets the job done with whatever that I'm trying to do. And the nice thing is, if you are unsure, you can always just grab the regular M1 and upgrade down the road if you need to. Apple products hold their value extremely well, so if you do want to sell this in the future to help offset the cost of a new machine, chances are you will make out pretty well on it. I would love to know if there are any other M1 users out there and what their experience has been. Have you felt the need to upgrade to the M1 Pro or the M1 Max? Has there been anything that you have noticed that slowed you down? And on the flip side, let me know what you love about the M1 in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. It really does help me out so much. If you want to see this face, new words, and new tech related content, please subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified anytime that I release new videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.